Hey guys, my name's Brian Vosper. I'm here with Mike Greaney. We're going to be, sorry we've been MIA a little. We hope all you guys had an amazing Thanksgiving holiday. And we're sorry again that we missed last week. And so I'm here with Mike today. It's a shorter podcast today. We actually got a pretty good question from someone on Twitter this past week. Remember, you can send all questions to just thirdway at CESJ.org. So the word THIRDWAY at CESJ.org. Or you can message me on Twitter or Instagram or send fan mail. I don't know what you want to do. Or also Mike's email was also in the one podcast we posted the other day. So if you want to contact him or comment on the blogs, we would love the feedback and anything that we can do to help you guys out or learn more. We would love to help. And so,
or you can pay a visit to the website at www.cesj.org, and there's contact information there.
There we go. So anything you need, just head to the website, and we'll be glad to help you out. And so the questions today, mainly, this is going to be a short one again, but the first question was, how do you get assets to future startups through the Just Third Way, and how do startups benefit? Mike has, as we remember, he has more of a finance background. He is a CPA. And so this was a good question addressed towards him. So we can start out with that first part. How do you get assets to future startups through the Just Third Way?
Yeah, that's not only a good question, it's an excellent question, because there are two types of startups. So, of course, there's two different ways the Just Third Way would address them. The typical type of startup is going to be somewhat speculative. Some genius or entrepreneur has an idea, and it looks good, it feels good, it should work, but you don't really know that it's going to work. So it's a gamble.
Yeah.
Well, for gambling in the Just Third Way, that's what you use your existing money for, your past savings. We talk about the slavery of past savings. Well, past savings doesn't have to enslave you, it can liberate you. And one of the things that it can liberate you with respect to is, well, let's take a flyer on this speculative venture. We know it's a gamble. We don't know it's going to work. But let's put our venture capital to work. And this is where there's the critical role of the entrepreneur and the venture capitalist in the Just Third Way. Because they're the ones who have these brilliant speculative ideas, but also the money. And if the entrepreneur can convince the venture capitalist that here's a good way to make some money. Now, maybe it won't pay off. Maybe it will. But if you invest your money into it, we'll see where it goes. And then, if it does turn out to be successful, this is where the entrepreneur gets rewarded. Because once the business is up and running, it's a successful, established business, and it will qualify for the special Just Third Way pure credit type of financing, the entrepreneur and the venture capitalist can sell their stake to the workers at whatever the market determines. And that will determine the just reward to both of them. Because why should an entrepreneur get more than something's worth? But then on the other hand, why should he get less than something's worth? Now, there's another type of startup. And I can best exemplify this by an example. Some years ago, one of EEI's, Equity Expansion International's, big projects was something called the Alexandria Tire Company in Egypt. And this was there was definitely a market for steel-belted truck tires, radial truck tires in Egypt. Well, the only way to get them was to import them, which meant high duties, tariffs, high prices, and everything else. Perfect market opportunity for a privately owned, steel-belted radial truck tire company. Now, just in case you think I know what the heck I'm talking about with steel-belted, all I know is that tires go on a truck or a car or something. But I do know how the financing was arranged. Part of it, the original idea was a joint venture between the state-owned tire company, Trenco,
Okay.
and Pirelli Tire of Italy. You probably heard of Pirelli. And the state came up with some money, some private investors came up with some money, USAID came up with some money, but then there was still a chunk of financing that needed to be done. And everybody knew this was going to work because the market was there. Everybody knew, and the bulk of the financing was there. All they had to do was plug it in, and somebody had the brilliant idea, why don't we make this that portion of the financing workaround? And this became, very briefly, official USAID policy for this type of operation in a developing country.
Wow.
In fact, that was not pure credit financing. USAID had the money, but it would have worked exactly the same if it had been pure credit financing, which is money is created for that purpose alone. And then as it becomes profitable, the loan is paid off and the money is canceled, thereby avoiding both inflation and deflation at both ends of the transaction.
Wow.
This was so successful as a model, not in practice, but as a model, that the American Enterprise Institute, Melanie Taman, wrote into the Wall Street Journal and said, USAID policy for Egypt is a total loss except for the Alexandria Tire Company. Okay. Unfortunately, it was so successful that Pirelli decided they wanted to buy the whole thing, so they offered the workers more than the market value of the shares, bought it up, and now then they owned the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
So, as I said, strictly as a model, it was very good. In practice, it didn't work out quite as well because, frankly, the poor Egyptian workers didn't really understand what it meant to be the owner. And so they took the short-time gain. This sort of thing also happened in Poland and in Russia with the voucher schemes and everything else. Oh, yeah, I'm an owner now. I can trade this voucher for shares that may or may not pay off, and I have no idea what it means to own corporate shares or anything. Or you mean I can take this $1.50 and buy a bottle of vodka or dinner for tonight? Guess which one they took? So the oligarchs who had all the money went around and, for a few bucks, bought vouchers that should have been worth about $200 each. Okay. And so to answer the question very quickly, for the speculative type of startup, the Just Third Way can't offer anything until it's up and running as a viable company. For the type of startup in which there's an established market and you know it's going to work, then the Just Third Way can, you plug in with the pure credit and the expanded ownership, and it should work very well.
Wow. And so also, he did mention Equity Expansion International.
Correct.
That's their, I don't know if I ever mentioned that, but that's their professional side of the organization.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's not. It's
a separate. Sorry, I meant separate organization.
Yeah, because EEI, Equity Expansion International, is a for-profit company.
And then
it just
CESJ
happens
non-profit.
that the people involved in CESJ are frequently involved in EEI as well. So it's two
two separate organizations.
Wearing different hats, definitely.
Yeah, totally. And so, but that's the thing where Mike's background comes into play, because he knows the finance behind all of that. So wow, that was a cool story. And then, how did the other question was, the follow up was, how did they get the assets? I believe that was the other question.
Okay, the financing of assets.
How do startups benefit? Like, so I think you kind of
that was in
you pretty much answered. Yeah, you pretty much got it covered. I guess we can move on to the next one. This was because that was a great answer, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I stole Norm's story.
No, but that was awesome. And this next question was actually from a guy that messaged me on Twitter the other day. He tracked me down and messaged me. He's like, "Hey, are you the person that does the Just Third Way podcast?" And I was like, "Yes, I am." I'm not, and I'll be honest, I don't use my Twitter a ton, but I've been using it more. But you can't get a hold of me that way. But it's funny how he tracked me down. But his question, I'll just read what he sent me. It was, One of the main complaints of the socialists against capitalism is rent-seeking tendencies of the rich. If you are unfamiliar with the term rent-seeking, read about it here. He sent me a little link and says, where the term gets its namesake, I believe, is from the practice of owning land and renting it out to be used while putting no work into it yourself. This practically creates an old-world-style landowning aristocracy and has their privilege in class just because. This effect especially gets pronounced on land with vast minerals, gold, oil, water, etc. Socialists/communists envision a society where rent-seeking is abolished by definition because no one truly owns land or anything anymore. I wonder how the Just Third Way plans to deal with rent-seeking while preserving private ownership of land. How is land distributed and sold in the first place? And balancing ownership of mineral rights with the demands of the common good. Could you bring that up with Mike? So that was kind of long, but that's word for word what he sent me.
Yeah. It's another excellent question. And in fact, first, a little historical background. The idea that you cannot own land and that rent is somehow wrong comes from the economist David Ricardo's labor theory of value, which was an extreme distortion of that of Adam Smith. Adam Smith's concept was that values are determined in the mind of the consumer or the user by measuring what did it take me to obtain what it is that I'm trading for the thing that I want to get. And usually someone said, will value something in terms of the labor that it took them to obtain the thing that they're trading with the other person to get what the other person produced. Hence, labor theory of value, which may not have any labor in it at all. It's just that, that took me 10 hours to produce, therefore I'm valuing it in terms of the 10 hours that it took me to produce. Therefore, I'm valuing the thing that I want to get as 10 hours worth of my labor. That's all that Adam Smith meant. Because to Adam Smith, value is determined by the user, not by the seller or the producer. Not so, says David Ricardo. Ricardo says, oh no, something is valued at what it costs to produce it, and labor is the only thing that is really productive. Therefore, if you spent enormous effort creating something, like 100 hours to produce a building block, that building block is worth 100 hours of labor, which means that if your labor is worth $1,000 an hour, and you spend 100 hours to produce something, that brick is worth $100,000.
Got it.
In other words,
creating like
something
an actual
is worth
creating that
not
standard
what it's worth to the user, but what it was worth to the producer.
Yep.
Which is pretty lousy salesmanship, because every producer says, "Oh, well, what I produce is immensely valuable because I produced it."
Mark it up.
Yeah. So, from that came David Ricardo's incredibly confused theory of rent.
Okay.
And nobody understands this. Not even David Ricardo back in the early 19th century. They even call it Ricardo's detour. Well, what is Ricardo's detour? Well, it's that both land is and is not a factor of production, and you can and cannot charge for it. Now, as soon as you figure that out, you tell me. So, the idea came to be that, since human labor did not, you can only own what your labor produced. But you didn't produce land, because land is there. It was already created, whether by God or it just happened to be spontaneously, whatever your beliefs are. But the bottom line is that human labor did not create land or natural resources, therefore you cannot own land or natural resources, at least going by the chain of thought started by David Ricardo's labor theory of value. Well, that sort of contradicts natural law, which says anything that exists can be owned. I mean, this is basic Roman law, the principle of which is everything to its proper owner. If you could figure out a way to define a chunk of air, you could own air privately.
Yeah.
And actually, and this is to finally answer the question.
No, it's all good. This is all great.
You can own air. Just not, okay, I own this chunk, you own that chunk, and somebody else owns the other chunk. No. It's like how you own a corporation. If you own a share of AT&T, can you point to which part of AT&T you own?
It's kind of hard to do that.
Yeah, no. One share of stock means you have what is called a defined ownership stake of that portion of the company. You own a defined stake of the entire company, not any particular part of it. So what we say is set up something we call, we've named it a number of things over the years as we've tried to refine, pick out what's the best name for this thing. Is it Citizens Land Bank, Citizens Land Cooperative? I'll say Citizens Land Cooperative since that's the latest one as of today.
Yeah.
But the idea is you set up a privately owned corporation that every single resident in the area owns. They get a single share, non-transferable, no cost, full voting, full participating share in that corporation simply because they live there.
Okay.
And that corporation owns all the land, natural resources, and if you want to go this far, even the air. I mean, if you had a global Citizens Land Cooperative, you could do that. See it this way, if somebody's a polluter and polluting the air, the corporation can fine them and then fix it, using the proceeds from the fine instead of the government pocketing it and handing out to the politicians.
I think a lot of us would be getting fined today.
At this point, yeah. But see, one of the reasons is who owns the air? Well, that means as long as I can get away with it, I can pollute it. But if all of a sudden I own a part of it and you own a part of it, if I start polluting it, you can stop me because you all of a sudden have the right to because you're an owner. And ownership, as Lewis Kelso pointed out, is control in all codes of law. It means control, it means enjoyment of the fruits of ownership. And this is what a Citizens Land Cooperative would do for every single resident. Now, because typically, if one person owns all the land, then that one person is going to reap all the benefits and control all the land. Excuse me. Now,
bless you.
If the corporation that is owned by all the citizens owns the land, then people can democratically decide how the land is to be used. Suppose someone wants a 160-acre farm. Well, goes to the Citizens Land Bank, presents his proposal, selects the farm that he wants, pays a fair rent for it, or gets a leasehold, depending on how they want to arrange it. You can purchase a leasehold for, say, 99 years. In medieval times, they did it for 999. If you've ever seen a British or Irish real estate magazine or real estate officer, it will say something like 367 years left on the lease. I thought, oh, okay, so it has a high price. It has something like 2 years left on the lease. The price is going to be very low, which is going to amount to the rental for 2 years or something like that.
Yeah. Huh.
So what happens is that I want to use this land for this purpose. I lease it from the Citizens Land Bank, and the leasehold payments I make, however I make them, whether it's a one-time payment or annual or whatever, goes to the corporation, which uses it to pay its expenses, and then any profits are paid out as dividends to all the shareholders, so that no one person can benefit, have a monopoly benefit on land ownership, which is what the agrarian socialists, especially people like Henry George, they just couldn't. The land is owned by everybody, not by any individual person. Well, everybody is an abstraction. It doesn't exist apart from the human mind. Real people need to own, which they can do through a Citizens Land Cooperative. So that is how you can have all the land ownership privately owned, but also privately used, and the benefit flows to everybody fairly.
Wow.
Now, what about mineral rights?
And that's where it gets tricky.
No. Typically, even today, mineral rights are usually separated from the land use rights. Other land use rights, I should say. Okay. In other words, I recall in southern Indiana, where I'm from, the deed that my parents had for the house, it said X rights. Because in southern Indiana, quite frequently, you had natural gas or oil under that land. Well, whoever was originally selling the land didn't want to give up the possibility that the oil might be discovered, so they sold the land, but kept the oil rights and the mineral rights. So, but the Citizens Land Bank would own both.
Yeah.
Now, suppose
this makes it a little more fair.
you rented, you leased a farm, and then somebody discovers natural gas or petroleum or something under it. Well, most of these places, it's not going to hurt, the land use, except you put up a derrick or something in a small area of it for extraction. So what they would have to do is go to the Citizens Land Bank and say, how much is it going to cost me to purchase the extraction rights for this, so that the profits from that also go to the everybody in the area.
Okay.
Now, suppose, however, that it's a open pit mine or something. We discovered copper ore or something.
Yeah.
Well, that means that I can no longer use it for a farm until you restore it after you've extracted the minerals. Well, then, having paid a lease payment, the person who may have to move is compensated for that. In other words, hey, wait a minute, I paid $100,000 for this leasehold. Well, then, it's a 99-year lease. We'll round it off to 100, and you've used it for a year, so we'll pay you $99,000 for, what you just lost by having someone else, and democratically voted on that to allow the extraction of. You had a vote too, but you lost.
You lose.
But at least you get your $99,000 back.
Yeah.
And you get to share in the profits of the extraction that are paid, via their fees.
Okay. Wow. This was like a random question that popped into my mind. I'm not sure if you know this, but were there ever any situations, this might even happen today, to be honest, but were there ever any situations where, like, maybe someone found oil on their land? Well, I guess it's not their land, like, they're renting, but they haven't told the owner yet. They try and, like, extract it real quick, like, because I was in Palm Springs this last summer, and just giving you a little background, that there are a ton of vacations homes out there, and so a lot of people buy properties out there too to just rent them out and make money. Yeah. But a lot of times, the landowner might even live in Florida or something. Yeah. So
I don't know of any specific cases, but I will say I would be surprised if it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And of course, there's always the case where
and obviously I'm not advocating that in any way. Like,
no, but for instance, even in the Bible, in the New Testament, it says someone discovers a treasure on the land, on a field,
yeah,
and quickly buys the field so that he can have the treasure. And I thought, that always kind of bothered me. I know what the whole intent of the parable was, but it doesn't sound quite honest to me.
Yeah. Yeah. But that was cool. Well, yeah, I think we covered the main questions. We hope that answered your question on Twitter. It was, I don't have his real name, but it was @CanonicBrood. Thanks for sending that in. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email thirdway, THIRDWAY @CESJ.org, or you can email Michael or me, or you can message their Twitter account. It's CESJ_org. And, you can follow them. And thanks again for listening in. We're grateful for all of you that have been listening to these podcasts, giving us feedback, talking to Mike on his blogs. Make sure you check those out because they're posted daily. And Mike works really hard on those, and he deserves a ton of credit for the hard work he does. And so we hope you guys have a great week, and we're thankful for everything you do. Thanks.